Shauna, as a close friend of yours, I know that you lost your dad young in your life and you've lived with that grief. And I'd just be interested to know what you've learned about the loss of a parent and how one learns to adjust to that and live with that and I guess re-equalise in your life once you've lost a parent. I appreciate it doesn't really matter what age that happens in your life. It's actually an enormous shock. And just, how you get your head around having lost a parent.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, so Lucille, thank you for that question, I think. So yes, you're absolutely right. I did lose my dad 22 years ago. And that has been definitely a journey for myself and my family. And I think before I go any further, I just want to say that you don't actually have to have lost a parent to go through profound grief. It can be a divorce or losing a very close friend. I think that a lot of the emotions can be very similar. I think that it took me a very long time to be able to talk about my dad without getting upset. And it's probably going to be a challenge for me to even record this podcast without getting upset. I think that what has happened with time, and it's obviously been a very long time, is that I feel like I have finally started to be able to really see the meaningful parts of that grief process. And what I mean by that is that I suppose I'm now able to look back and see the benefits of having my dad as my dad. I'm able to see all the things that I learned from him and also probably how much I grew as a person following his death and navigating the difficulties that I experienced after that. And I think the more sort of meaningful things that potentially can happen for anyone is perhaps becoming more spiritual and feeling a greater connection to other family members. I think that in itself can be quite a journey as well. And I've walked this pathway with a number of friends who've also lost parents around the same time as I lost my dad. And one thing that I will say is that grief doesn't always bring families closer together. And that doesn't mean that you've got a bad family or bad connection, but just that everyone within that family navigates grief very, very differently. And I know even within my own family, I felt like we went from being very, very close to a period of not feeling so close. And then we've ended up very, very close again. But I see both in friends and both in my GP practice as I navigate the grief journey with people that this is a very common thing that seems to happen. And that's because when people are grieving, it's actually quite a personal journey. And, you know, even if you have an identical twin, I think it's highly unlikely that that person's going to have the same journey. Lots of people know the concept of, you know, the 5 stages of grief or the 6 stages of grief or the 7 stages of grief, depending on where you have heard of it. And that all does actually stem from a piece of work from the 1960s by a lady called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book called On Death and Dying. And she really described the stages that people will go through. And that includes denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And the 6th step that was sort of added later was meaning. And I think that a lot of people, if they look back on their journey of grief, can see that they probably did go through all of those stages, but it's not like walking up a ladder or up a set of stairs. Or if it is, you can go back up and down the rungs repeatedly. And you might go back steps and forward, and it might sometimes feel like you're doing, 2 steps forward and then 3 back and then 2 forward again. So it's definitely not a linear journey. So I suppose what I've learned from that experience is that you literally can have a profound pain, a physical pain in your chest. And that was probably one of the things that I found the most shocking, was that I actually was in physical pain. And of course, we now know that people are at really high risk, at the most high risk of having a cardiac event during the process of grief. And they used to sort of half-heartedly call it broken heart syndrome, but we now know it's a real thing. And whenever people are in profound grief, you actually can get changes within the heart and within the heart muscle. And for some people, that can actually, lead to them actually having a cardiac event. I'm not saying that the pain that I had was caused by that, but certainly it felt like a real heavy, stressful feeling in my chest. It didn't go away genuinely for a couple of years. I think that whenever you're in acute grief, it tends to be, there's a lot of busyness. There's maybe funerals and financial things to organize. And there can be an initial period where there's just a lot of busyness. And a lot of people will be flocking around to help, and there'll be a lot of support. And then as time goes on, people move on with their life. And that can almost feel like it seems a little bit disloyal to the person who has died. And I can remember having these really strange things. So obviously, as most of you know, I lived for most of my life just outside Belfast. And I can remember around the time my dad passed away, they were building a really massive new stadium and concert hall in Belfast. And I can remember feeling really sad that my dad never saw it. And it felt sort of disloyal that life had gone on without him. And I think that a lot of people can have that feeling. I think the other thing that probably happened to a number of my patients, and I know at times my mum even felt this, is that whenever she went from being part of a couple who were invited out for meals and to parties and to different things, suddenly whenever people find themselves as a single person, sometimes their group of friends doesn't quite know what to do with them. And this can also happen in divorce. If people have hung around in a big gang of couples and suddenly someone gets divorced, they can often feel that they feel a little bit on the outer. And I think that's really, really challenging. The other thing I think with grief that can be really challenging, and I know it's something that my own children have struggled to navigate, is whenever they've had a school friend who have had a bereavement, they're not sure whether to mention it. They feel like that they don't want to upset the person or make them feel sad. And one of the things that I've learned both personally and also professionally is I think it's really, really important to talk about the person's loss. I think I remember really clearly the people who avoided the subject, but I remember also so dearly the people who were prepared to speak about my dad and who were happy to navigate the tears with me, because I would get upset, but they didn't avoid it. And I think that if you can give one gift to yourself or to someone else going through this, is to sit in the discomfort and allow the person to be sad and not avoid the subject. I think a long time has passed, like 22 years since I last spoke to my dad, which feels really hard. And he never got to meet 3 of my children. So that feels really difficult as well. But mostly, apart from today, when I'm recording this, I can feel that the love overrides the pain most of the time. And I know that he would look down and be really proud of what I've achieved. And even the fact that I'm talking about this today to hopefully help someone else who's listening. So I think that the things that I'm grateful for out of this situation is that hopefully I've been able to empathize with my patients and my greater circle of friends and family whenever they've had to navigate a bereavement. I think I also have a strong desire just to mention another group of people who I feel go through a grief that is often untalked about, and that is women who suffer a miscarriage or stillbirth. This can be extremely challenging. Again, I've had this situation myself, and it was extremely difficult to navigate. You can almost feel like your feelings feel maybe out of proportion, or you feel a bit over the top. Maybe people didn't even know that you were pregnant in the first place. But again, my one piece of advice to anyone listening would be to share their situation. And if you're someone who knows someone going through that situation, talk to them about it. Ask them, did they give the baby a name? They know if it was a boy or a girl. When was the baby due? Pop it in your diary when the baby was due, so that you can send the person a message or give them a call that day. You're not going to remind someone of something like this. They are not going to forget it. So you mentioning it does not bring it up into someone's mind, because you can be rest assured that they're acutely aware of what day it is. And they probably would love nothing more than someone to reach out and talk to them about it. The other thing that I suppose I've learned from grief is that I'm lucky enough to still have one parent who is alive. And although she lives on the other side of the world, I talk to her all the time. I'm lucky enough that she is generous enough with her time and energy that she comes over to Australia very frequently to stay with me and be with me and my children. And I think whenever you've lost one parent, it makes you cherish the other one that you have already. So in conclusion, I think that it's a really difficult and very long journey. And as you can tell from today, I can still be reduced to tears 22 years later. There is a really interesting and helpful book, I think, and it's called Finding Meaning, the sixth Stage of Grief, and it's by David Kessler. And I think that's a really beautiful book, and it steps you through just trying to find some peace, some hope, some reconnection, because grief can definitely be quite isolating for a lot of people. They can find that they go into themselves. They often avoid social situations. They avoid doing things that they've previously done. And I feel like when you're ready, this book can be a really good and important part of that journey. I really hope that that's helped today, for you to understand a little bit more about me, and also may help you on your journey if you're struggling with grief or have someone in your life who is at this point.